Today on the show, the pleasure of speaking with Travis Hornsby. Travis is the founder, I should say, of the student planner. Oh, I'm going to start that all again. I stuffed that right up. Sorry about that.
All right, student loan planner. Yep.
Yeah, student loan planner. A bit of a tongue twister. This is my third podcast of the day, so excuse me for being a little tired. Laura, count you in again. Count you in 3, 2, 1. Today on the show, I have the pleasure of speaking with Travis Hornsby. Travis is the founder of Student Loan Planner and the host of the Student Loan Planner podcast. To date, Student Loan Planner has consulted on over $500 million in student debt. Travis is a chartered financial analyst, and he brings the same intensity to analyzing the best repayment options for graduate degree professionals with 6 figures of student debt. Now, Student Loan Planner has helped over 2,600 clients save over $120 million on their student loans. And he's been featured in US News, Business Insider, Forbes, Huntington Post, Rolling Stones, and my favorite media outlet, Vice Media. I'm really excited and pumped to have him on the show today, but enough out of me. Let's get him out of here. G'day, Travis. Welcome to the show. How you doing today, mate?
It's pretty good.
Mate, thank you for joining us. I kicked the show off with pretty informal question, but rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
As a kid, I mean, I probably
and don't say mowing lawns. I get so many people saying mowing lawns.
So I think it must have been. I guess the very first time I remember it was I probably got $1 for my first A in the 3rd grade.
First A. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, for my like every A I got on my report card, my granddad would give me $1 or something like that. Maybe it was $5 for an A. I can't remember. I think it might have been $1. And you get a report card every quarter, right? So I got $7 for 7 A's, as a kid in the 3rd grade when I started getting letter grades for the first time, and I felt really accomplished. Nice. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a wonderful lesson because I had friends that would get $20 bills for A's, and I was getting like $1. I was like, granted, why are you giving me $1? And it was like you're supposed to work hard, right? You're supposed to get good grades. You're not being paid to be a student. You need to want to do this intrinsically. So that was a wonderful lesson. And then the second lesson was that your brain can earn you a lot more money than go weeding, or mowing a lawn outside, right? So I did both. And eventually my granddad started paying me well above market rate to mow his lawn, like, way more than I should have gotten paid. Right. But that was an amazing first lesson about money.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds like your granddad had a bit of an influence on your upbringing. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I can't really stress how big of an influence. I mean, he was sort of my hero. Like, some friends accuse me of even kind of almost like viewing him as an idol or something. But but I think the reason I look up to him so much is just because he is one of these people that went through so much, right? He went through the Depression, and their family lost their farm because my great grandfather was a principal of a high school, and then the Great Depression happened, and then nobody paid their property taxes, right? And so in the South where they lived, instead of paying all of the county employees, they literally just gave people script. So they gave you an IOU that you had to receive a certain amount of money for your salary. So imagine working for an employer that gave you a promise to pay at some point when they had the funds, right? That'd be pretty awful. Right. And so he tried to go take that to the bank, to try to get that to be used for his mortgage. And the bank said no, And so then they lost their farm because of that. And so his choice was basically to sell that script for whatever they could get for it. So you literally, instead of getting your wages, you're getting pennies on the dollar for your wages because you're selling it to an investor, and that's what they had to do. And so then, they severely downgraded. And then my granddad had to fight in a world war and saw lots of people die around him. You know what I mean? So that caused him to be an extreme saver and investor. And he never made a ton of money, but he had an extraordinarily large, amount of money relative to what he did earn, if that makes sense, And so I always thought it was just really fascinating how somebody that just worked really hard, was super smart, invested, in stocks from a young age, can have significant financial security for your family over the very long term. So that was my first lesson about finances. And so I guess, whoever your hero is, you want to be just like, right? Mm-hmm. And so I asked my granddad one time if he could do it all over again, and would he, be an engineer again? He said, no, I probably would get into finance of some sort. And so I got into that sort of field, taking some economics classes. And my first macroeconomics class was when Lehman Brothers blew up. And I'll never forget my prof. He came into the class and he took the book And I want to say he just started ripping pages out of the book, but I think what he did, he took the Wall Street Journal and he just ripped it to shreds and he just threw it all over the class. And he's like, everything we knew about, macroeconomics is gone. I don't know anything anymore. We need to pull out all of our books about the Great Depression because that's what we need to figure out.
Right.
And it was so thrilling that I pursued that path. That led to me becoming a bond trader. So that was kind of the next part of my journey.
Interesting. So talk to me about that, because it's all about the journey that you've gotten you to where you are today. And clearly your grandfather had a massive influence on your life as a kid and obviously into your young adulthood, because he influenced where you would go essentially in life. So talk to me about those days. So you were at school during the 2008 crash?
I was. And it was unbelievable. Like my economics professors just randomly said they were going to give a talk on the economy and what was going on. And we're kind of close to the Villages where I went to school, University of Florida. The Villages is like one of the largest, place for seniors to retire in the country. And the Villages, I think the entire 1,000 old people showed up to hear this talk. I mean, it was truly unbelievable how many people showed up, just because they were all freaking out about the markets, right? So that was just, it was crazy. And then just getting to see that crash and then just the recovery. It was really fascinating and just made me want to get involved in markets in some capacity just because of just how much action there was in it.
Interesting. And so what did you get involved in? You went and said you became a bond trader. That would have been some the bonds backed by some mortgage notes that might not have been quite as good as they. How did all that world work once after 2008?
Yeah, so I got involved in something called the municipal bond market. So that's a little bit of a weird market for foreigners, right? Because it's a market that only exists the way it does in the United States. Basically, cities and state governments and not-for-profit like toll road authorities and places like that, they'll go out and borrow without having to have their investors pay income taxes on the interest. It's called tax-exempt bonds, right? So it's a huge part of the market in America, and so they basically have these huge funds for people that are in super high tax brackets to avoid having to pay income taxes on the interest. And so the idea is that investors are willing to accept a lower interest rate than they would on a corporate bond that is taxable. So the cities get a benefit, the investor gets a benefit, everybody's happy, right? And so I was on this team that managed $100 billion of municipal bond, municipal bond debt. So it was pretty big.
Yeah, huge.
and I got to see things like the bankruptcy of Detroit. I got to see the bankruptcy of Puerto Rico. I got to see all kinds of things that happened in the markets while I was there. But the thing that was missing from that was feeling like I was helping someone. So I really enjoyed teaching and really enjoyed helping others. And that's the part that I felt like I was missing, is when you're a bond trader, you have to have a skill set of paying attention to what's going on in the market, and just that's all you do. And it's not like stocks where you like know what the ticker price is like on the tape all day. Like bond market's very negotiated. So like you don't really know what the price of something is. You just have to be attuned to the market. So it was really exciting, but it wasn't the perfect fit of my skills, right? So they, like a lot of people in my life have said that you need to shoot for something where your passion and the world's great hunger meet. And so, the world had plenty of bond traders and it wasn't necessarily my passion. And so I could be a good one, maybe above average one, to really do really, really well. But I looked at my life and I thought, well, let's say that I'm the world's most successful bond trader. I'm good at it. I have a lot of money, but am I happy? The answer was no. Then I realized I needed to do something else. And that's around the time I found the FIRE movement, which we can certainly talk about. But that's what led me to retire from being a bond trader at the age of 25.
Interesting. So to talk to me about that, you said the FIRE, F-I-R-E.
FIRE movement has been something that people talk about a lot, I think, in the media. It's financial independence, retire early.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sitting there in a corporate environment, not super happy with my day in and day out. And so I thought, okay, let me just quit and just travel the world. But before I did that, I wanted to hit a substantial level of assets so that I could afford to not work for a while. Because the worst thing you can do is go quit and travel around and then have to go right back to that same corporate existence you weren't enjoying, right? So I saved up a significant chunk of my money and had like an extreme savings rate, like 70, 80%. Yeah, I was living in an unfinished basement at some point. I was a freaking weirdo back in the day. And hit this level of savings rate so I could save so much. And then while this happened, 2012 to 2015 were unbelievable years in the market, right? So, my investments were soaring at the same time as I was contributing a ton of money.
Got
And
it.
so I'm not saying that I had seven figures or anything, but I had a significant amount of money stashed away where I could afford to not work for a while.
And what did you do? Did you go traveling? Where'd you go?
I went everywhere but Australia and Asia.
Don't say you went to New Zealand. You didn't go to Australia.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. So I went to, I met a ton of Australians though.
Yes, we're everywhere.
And they're either very nice or very rowdy, one of the two. So
I can't speak to my fellow countrymen, all right, and their behavior.
Yeah, exactly. So, so we had, I went all over Europe, like 30 something countries in Europe, 10 something countries in Latin America, did just very bizarre stuff, like, lived in Ukraine for a bit, took a bus through El Salvador. Like,
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was just amazing. It was the
How
kind
long
of stuff.
Were you gone for?
Yeah. A year. I mean, but I was off and on. Like, I would come back occasionally, to see family and stuff like that. I was probably actually a year and a half. I traveled, and the thing that happened next was right before I quit my job, I met the woman who's now my wife, and she had a lot of student loan debt, right? So that's kind of the segue into what I do now, because I thought it would be pretty easy to help her figure it out, right? Because I was a bond trader, Excel skills, I know how to do this stuff, right? So anyways, we were talking, and I realized it was a lot harder than that, because, like, unlike in other countries, the debt in America is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike other countries, there's all these ways to mitigate it, like forgiveness plans, So there's all these different programs. Like, for her, there was this not-for-profit and government service program that she could use called public service loan forgiveness. So this is a program where, essentially, think of it like paying a tax for 10 years and then all of your debt's forgiven. So imagine you had the option to pay a 10% income tax for 10 years and then never have any debt for your student loans ever again. That's basically what this program is. But now imagine that she wasn't set up to pay that income tax in the right way, right? Like, now imagine she had the wrong kind of loans for part of that period. And now imagine that the place that was supposed to track that for her not only didn't track it, but actively gave her the wrong information as to how many years of credit she had towards this program. So she should have actually been only 3 years away from having a 6-figure student loan balance forgiven. Instead, it got botched and she didn't get any of it forgiven.
Wow.
And so that was a 6-figure mistake. And so I thought, wow, this is essentially 2 years of her take-home pay as a doctor in training, a resident, right? Mm-hmm. So 2 years take-home pay just because of somebody making a mistake with personal finance that they didn't understand before.
Interesting.
Right?
Well, before we dive into that, because it's very interesting, and to the travel part, well done, because a lot of Americans couldn't even think of taking 2 weeks off at one time.
Yeah.
The fact that you went away for 18 months is awesome, because it changes the psyche of how Americans do think. And you guys are you're the land of capitalism and opportunity and all that good stuff, but taking time off is freaking, you all go nuts, right?
I mean, I would honestly, if there was some sort of, like, this is a little weird to say, but if there was like a nuclear war and I could get in somewhere else, it'd probably be Australia, because, people were very friendly and it was just a very open kind of culture. And again, such a globalized kind of path. Like, basically I asked one of the Aussies I talked to, I was like, wow, how are you guys all over the world? Like, wherever I go, you're there. And it doesn't matter if it's in Latin America or Europe or, the Middle East or whatever, I just see you everywhere. And they said, well, basically, here's how it goes. It's so freaking expensive to leave Australia. I mean, it's a small fortune. And so when you finally get away from it, you just want to actually make sure that it's worthwhile, because it's going to cost a small fortune to do it again.
Yep.
And then also, I think that they had like a 6-month kind of, kind of break or something like that between university or something like that.
Oh, no, it's more to do with just, it's entrained in our DNA to
do it.
Like, just be like, you got the rest of your life to be at school, go enjoy it now. I did it after I finished school. So you either do it before, from high school to uni, which you're probably a little bit too young, like you're only 18, 19, where I did it when I was 21, 22, 23.
Yeah. And it was so fun. I mean, so I think that, the world travels. I mean, I can't stress that enough, because you find out a little bit more about what you want in life.
Exactly.
When you're so 100%. stuck in that grind, you're just so focused on, I got to do a good job on the next project, or I got to do, I got to do a great job for my friend's birthday party, or like, I got, whatever, I don't know, like just the day-to-day stuff that you worry about. Like, what am I going to have for dinner tonight is going to be good. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, when I was abroad, I didn't care at all. Like, I only had the next 2 or 3 days of my life planned. like,
That
because
was it.
that was it. I would plan out like the hostel stay, and then probably like third or fourth hostel night. Like if I was enjoying a place, I would like ask if they had another night, well, usually they did. And then when I was ready to move on, I would just look and see what the next stop was,
Yep.
And
I think the number one piece of advice I could give to people, and the most freeing, particularly more for males than females, a little harder for females to travel alone, but
Sure.
backpacking by yourself
Mm-hmm.
is the most liberating thing I can recommend to anyone. And when you're young in your early 20s, I had some people that I was sort of being a bit of a mentor to. They're like just out of college and they're going straight into a job and blah, blah, blah. And they're stressed. And then I'm like, how old are you? And they're like 24. And I'm like, dude, go and travel the world for 2 years.
Go right now.
Go, even if you came back at 26, that you're still freaking young. Like relax.
Yeah.
Like go experience the world, make some mistakes, learn the university of life, and learn how to backpack by yourself and meet.
Yeah.
So
the other thing I would add to that is that you have to do it. I would say unless you're married and have kids, so you got to do it, because even if you're in a relationship, like you should obviously have a discussion about it. It is a serious like discussion to have. Like I'm not kidding that it's not, but you want to make sure that your relationship can survive something like that,
right?
Because like realistically in your life, like you will have things like temptations of the attractive new person, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like also in the hostel with you, and it's like if your partner's not there, right? Like the equivalent I guess is you're on a business trip or something, right? So it's like is your relationship strong enough to survive something like that? I'm not saying go out and intentionally test it or something, but like
I know what you mean. I know,
but do it. Yeah, but do it if you're single, and if you're in a relationship where you're not married already. Like I would say, do it even more. Like, and just make sure. And obviously, it would be fun to probably travel with your partner or whatever. But
the number one thing they say is like go traveling if you're in a new relationship and test the relationship. Right?
Yeah. So I think I just wish more people would do that as Americans, because I think that people are way too programmatic here. Like I think one of the problems is why maybe entrepreneurial activity isn't where we need it to be. It's just people don't take risks because they're so afraid of what could happen. And the thing is the only people that need to be worried about risks are the people who haven't prepared to handle what could happen.
Right. No, I completely, and I guess what I can hear in you is that you love uncertainty like myself. I quit my job back in 2012 and moved to America with just an idea to try and make it here. And the backup plan was to move back to Australia. That was it. And so, but no, it's extremely interesting. And I just wanted to touch on that because you've clearly created a freedom lifestyle where you've gone abroad and traveled the world and become so much more knowledgeable about how other people think, about how other cultures interact with one another, and you become more rich, not actually through wealth generating, efforts, but just through travel and meeting people. I think, travel is one of the best things you can spend money on, and, takes the blinkers off and makes you so much more open-minded, not just narrow-minded and worrying about what the hell you're going to have for dinner or worrying about if you're going to buy a Maserati or not, like all those sort of superficial crap that you don't need in your life. So really awesome. I want to get into the nuts and bolts of what you do. So you mentioned earlier about the student loan debt. So do you want to give maybe a breakdown of how when you came back from your travels, how you decided to get into the student loan debt? And maybe for those people who don't understand, who are foreigners, most of my listeners are Americans, but who don't understand maybe the big business that is university here in America.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been trying to do a little bit of comparative research because like it really is interesting, the different student loan systems that exist out there. But basically in America, student loans became a thing kind of starting in the 50s from what I understand. So like we were losing the space race, right? Because Sputnik happened. And so the government got into it in a big way. And then initially, the costs were pretty small. Because higher education wasn't this massive industrial complex, right? Like think about back in the day with healthcare, we didn't have like gigantic, 50, story hospital buildings. We had like the doctor that would treat everything that would go to your house, right? And so with school, what happened is more and more resources got thrown behind it, and then more and more gains were happening because of education. That's true, right? And then I think that in the 2000s in America, there was kind of rocket fuel put on the growth of student loan debt because they uncapped borrowing for borrowers, right? With something called the PLUS loan. So in America, this PLUS loan is used one of two ways. There's a PLUS loan you can take out for a graduate student. That's to cover any kind of professional school. You want to become a doctor, lawyer, dentist, whatever. If you want to borrow for your kids, you can take out a parent plus loan. And so neither one of those two loans have any cap on the amount that you borrow. And it's totally subject to what the uni says is the cost of attendance, right? So if they tell you that it costs $400,000 to become a dentist, you literally can get fully government backed loans directly from the government for the entire 400,000 with no credit history and no income like history at all.
Wow.
You
Well,
know?
it's interesting you say government loans, because I just want to jump in here, because in Australia we have government loans as well. They're called HECS debt, but our HECS, for a 4-year civil engineering degree with honors, it cost me like $20,000.
Right.
And so it's great that there's government-backed loans. The issue seems to be the universities charging for this business of, I think you need to pay $400,000 to become a dentist, which is completely ludicrous.
Well, it's a little different. So like the average student loan debt for colleges in general, I think is like 35,000, maybe something along those lines. I mean, so that's for undergrad degrees. But the thing is for undergrads, they cap what you can borrow, and you're not allowed to borrow a bunch of private loans because you're not going to have a credit history to do it with. And so the undergrad system is a little bit more modest debt. So, our student loan debt, I would probably classify it as maybe approximately double that of Australia's for an undergrad degree. So I think it's probably still more than it should be, but it's reasonable. Where we see people get in a ton of trouble, or I think that there is a little bit more of a broader idea of what constitutes an education, higher education in America. So like, you can go become a barber, and, instead of just literally being a barber, there's all these licensing rules that cause all these barber colleges to pop up. And you have people, like in one case, there was like a college that focused on people with criminal records or something, and to try to like help them get barber jobs, but they were charging them ridiculous costs to go get a barber degree when you don't need a barber degree to freaking, cut hair. You need experience, right? On the job training. And so these people were being asked to pay back, 20 grand, for a barber degree. Yeah. And you're not going to do that easily on a kind of a minimum wage type of income. Right. So that's one problem. The other problem is the huge balances. So I would kind of blame both of those sides of the coin, basically. So we probably give out loans too liberally for too many programs in the US, when we really should be pushing people more towards like on the job trade or vocational training, which would exist if we didn't require licensing for like a billion different professions, And then the other thing is just the cost of professional schools so high because of this uncapped borrowing. Right. So that's interesting with Australia. I think that I've read stories that the Kiwis might even have it worse. Like basically I've seen people get arrested in the New Zealand airport that are New Zealanders that have fled the country. Yeah, they flee the country to try to avoid paying their student loans. And it's actually a huge problem. Like actually relative to the size of the economy, apparently New Zealand and America have about similar sized student loan debts. So I
can't comment on that, but I do know that like Australia used to have like if you've left the country and haven't paid taxes in, 5 years or 6 years, it just, whatever undergrad degree you've got is gone. Is repaid. The other systematic issue is I went straight into civil engineering school from high school. I didn't have to go and do an undergrad to then qualify to go to civil engineering school, which is another issue, which is like jamming more things in your throat that you need to have all this stuff to hoops to go through to get to the point of where you can finally choose what you want to do. And so, it's very much. But even on like the medical side of it, where I do not have friends who've gone down the medical, which was probably more comparable, it's nowhere near the debt that you still take out government-backed loans, but they're HECS debts where they're really low interest rates and it's a reasonable amount. It's not,
But here's where it gets weird, right? So like the way I got into doing this is like my wife had these complicated student loan problems, right? And then I found out that so did veterinarians and dentists and lawyers and all of our friends that had these professional programs too. And in America, you can pay a percentage of your income for 10 to 20 years and have it forgiven.
Yep.
Right. And so for the case of a doctor here, so let's do it like a brain surgeon, for example. So a brain surgeon probably has 7 or 8 years of training they're going to do before they're making 600 grand a year. Right. So certainly way more income than in the Australia, I think. Brain surgeons in America can make $600,000 to $1 million a year pretty easily. Right. So say you do that work at a not-for-profit hospital, which the training period is all done in a not-for-profit hospital all the time. So while you're enrolled in that training period, you'd pay about $200 or $300 a month on your $400,000 of medical school loans, right? So $300 a month, that's $3,500, $3,600, a year. So basically add that up over about 7 or 8 years, right? So 7 or 8 years, and it's actually 9 years because they look at your last year's tax return. So you could pay, if you structure it right, you could pay 9 years of about, let's just say $3,000 a month to keep it easy. It's $27,000, give or take, right? And then 1 year you'd pay 10% of half of your attending income because, you graduate in summer and you earn the rest of the year at your attending pay. And so what happens is maybe you pay about $2,000 a month for that 1 year based on that high income, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you paid about $27,000, add like 20 something thousand. So the total sum of the payment was about $50,000. Okay. So if you utilize that program correctly, the cost of your medical school was not $400,000 plus interest. It was $50,000 over 10 years.
Interesting.
For a degree that pays you a minimum of $600,000 income. Do you see why that's so impactful? So
yeah.
Basically, if you know how to utilize that program correctly, the brain surgeon just got the equivalent of a house, tax-free, by the way, which means that if you look at the pre-tax income you'd have to make, it's probably double whatever the forgiveness is. So they got a free house from the U.S. taxpayer, the average tax, the government, right? And that's all because they knew how to utilize the loan rules. And so in terms of your audience, because I know your audience is really interested in real estate and things like that. So, if there are ways where you can think of your debt as a tax, not a debt, that's the thing that liberates you in the United States. So if you have a ton of debt and you feel like you're totally screwed, the only scenarios I see where people truly are totally screwed is when they have a lot of private loans with a super high monthly payment, right? Private loans certainly are a challenge. So if your monthly payment's too bad, you can try to refinance it to a 20-year term to get a lower payment. That's the only option that a private loan borrower has. But most people don't have private loans, they have government loans, right? So your audience that has government loans, even if they have a whole bunch of government loans, what they can do is think about their loans as paying a percentage of their income. And I mentioned that program earlier, that's for people that work at not-for-profit or government employers. So that's about a quarter of the US workforce. So that's 1 in 4 of your listeners, in theory, right? Mm-hmm. And so what about the 3 in 4 that work in the private sector or want to have full-time careers in real estate or something like that, right? You can still pay a percentage of your income. Instead of taking 10 years, it takes 20, right. And then the other thing to think about is the forgiven debt after 20 years is considered taxable income. It's treated as a bonus when it's forgiven if you're in the private sector. Right. So in other words, if I owe $100,000 and it grows to $200,000 and that's forgiven, I've had to pay income tax on $200,000 when it's forgiven in 20 years. But there's different things you can do, like the kind of more simple strategies are reducing your income on your taxes, doing things like putting money into retirement savings, like reducing the number that they take the tax of. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then there's some more advanced strategies with real estate investors, basically called professional real estate investor status, which is really interesting because if you're not the person that wants to do the professional real estate stuff, say your spouse is, right? Well, then that spouse could do a bunch of, improvements to real estate, create a bunch of losses on paper, build wealth that way, but then use that to write off that active income that you have and reduce your tax rate. But remember that student loan payment can be treated not as a amortized debt payment that you would think of as a mortgage being. It can be treated as a percentage of your income. That's the groundbreaking thought. So imagine if you're, for a second, able to get your income super low through the U.S. professional real estate investor status, then you could pay 10% of zero, right? And then another loophole that's kind of fun, if somebody wanted to do a reverse read and go to Australia, right? So this is interesting because the U.S. actually grants citizens an exemption of $100,000 of income earned abroad before they have to claim any income in the United States. Yep. And remember that student loan payment is a percentage of your U.S. taxable income. So if I move to Australia and I owe student loans and I earn less than $100,000, I can file in the U.S. with a $0 income and get my payment based off of a $0 income in the United States.
But doesn't the loan still stay there over time?
It does, but those $0 a month payments count towards forgiveness.
Interesting. So do you think there's been a lot of talk about forgiveness payments recently, particularly in the, the political sphere running up to the 2020 election? Do you think that's going to be a massive issue that's going to be dealt with in the next couple of years? Like, there's going to be a lot of forgiveness and debt being forgived through candidates talking about it?
There's absolutely going to be debt forgiven, but it's going to be gradual rather than all at once. And the reason why I think that's the case is you already have the rules in the books. You're probably not going to see those become less generous, because I really can't point to any federal program that's become less generous. I mean, it just doesn't happen, right? You have interest groups that form and that protect those benefits. The way things change when something is too generous is it gets worse for people that take advantage of it in the future.
Right.
That's how we correct overshoots, like in America, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would expect is you're going to see basically politicians look at the problem, and the more progressive wing is going to say, let's forgive it all. They'll try to put some executive order forward to forgive it all. A extremely conservative judiciary in the United States is going to say, hey, no, that's not okay. And they're going to block it. And then they're going to say, you have to loop Congress in on this. And then I think whoever's the president and the Congress will have to come up with a system of basically turning this into a tax, because that's what it is in other countries. If you look at the UK, if you look at Australia, if you look at most other English-speaking countries with student loans, the worst case scenario is that the student loan debt is a tax, and that's it. And there's no tax bomb. There's no complicated forgiveness programs. There's no weird incentives going on. And in some cases, there's 0% interest. So I think that that's what's going to happen. It's like right now, the student loans in America are actually a tax, but you actually have to know quite a lot of math to realize that, because people don't understand the concept of keeping something around for 20 years, of lowering their taxable income so that you lower the number they take the percentage of for the student loans. They don't understand the idea of something like professional real estate investor status to reduce your adjusted gross income to pay less on your student loans. And they don't understand the concept of saving money along the way to prepare for the income tax bomb when your student loans are forgiven. So these are all fairly complicated topics. And also, I didn't mention this, but you also have to include your spouse in this income-based repayment. So imagine getting, 10% of your income bill, and you get married to some wonderful person who doesn't have student loans, and suddenly they're getting hit with a 10% tax too.
Right. Which is essentially me. You're talking about me and my wife right now. She has some student loans out there, not a significant amount, but she still does. And it's probably enough that we could pay it off very quickly. But and I think she actually got those loans to come to university in Australia, coincidentally. And I know international students are charged a lot more at university across the country in proportion across the world, Western countries, in proportion to other local students. So it's like going to, if you're a resident of California, it's a lot cheaper to go to UCLA than it is to go to Harvard in Boston.
Sure. So, well, you want to make up some numbers here. We shouldn't put the real ones out, but let's just make up some numbers. Like throw out some numbers.
$30,000.
Okay. And what's her hypothetical income?
Hypothetical income, 50, 60 grand a year.
Okay. So say you're a brand new college grad and you're not married. So if she consolidated her student loan debt of $30,000, so the way you do that is you go to this site called studentaid.gov. I want to make sure they just changed the website too. So I want to make sure that studentaid.ed.gov is the site. Actually, studentaid.gov works too. Okay. So you go to that site and you just request to consolidate your student loans. Just click through everything, give them everything they ask for, and then sign up for the revised pay-as-you-earn program. Okay. And so this revised pay-as-you-earn program would give her a subsidy of 50% of all of her interest on her unsubsidized loans for the first 12 months after graduation. And then on the subsidized loans, it's actually 100% subsidized for the 12 months after graduation, first 3 years actually. So in other words, what is a 50% interest subsidy worth? So if she's got 30,000 of loans, let's say that she's got interest charges of $200 a month. That's $100 a month that she's saving, and she's getting to pay $0 in payments, and the interest does not compound. That's the other pretty cool thing. So it's growing at a rate of simple interest, right?
Right.
So if effectively you took like a 6 or 7% loan, and she's graduated, she's probably thinking about doing other things, like maybe saving for a car, emergency fund, saving for a wedding, perhaps, like whatever, right? And so then instead of having to throw all of her money towards the loans, she can put some of her money towards these other things and also mitigate the interest cost.
Interesting.
Right?
So does this apply to anyone who's graduated? Like, she's been graduated for a couple of years now and probably is, not.
So here's the problem. So now that she's making $50,000, Now her prior year tax return shows 50,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now 10% of her income minus a little bit of a deduction probably results in her paying $300 a month on her student loans, right?
Right.
And so $300 a month fully covers all the interest costs. So because of that, there's actually no subsidy in that case. And so what she should do instead is, let's say she's got a 6% interest rate. Well, today you can refinance probably to a 3 or 4% interest rate. And does that save you a ton of money? No, but it saves you a couple $1,000s, right? A few $1,000s. So that's probably the equivalent of the take-home pay of an entire month just for doing something like moving your student loan to a lower interest rate. And one of the ways that I guess this student loan planner is different is we've taken lower commissions than basically anybody else in the market to create welcome bonuses when people do refinance. So for example, so like it depends on the amount. A lot of times what bonus we'll be able to negotiate for readers, but it's often like, $100 to $750 is the typical bonus range. So think about like opening a credit card, but kind of in reverse. You're cutting your interest rate on your student loans and actually getting paid to do that. And the banks like that because the government charges everybody the same price. So if you have a good debt to income ratio, like, your wife would in this hypothetical example, then she's going to be a better credit risk than that interest rate that the government's charging her shows, right?
Right.
So that's like a refinancing path, and then like a forgiveness path is, let's say that your wife was a teacher, and so she's got that, let's say a $50,000 income, and let's say that you make, 60, 70,000 and she's got, that $30,000 of debt. So you could file taxes separately, married filing separately, probably for a pretty small penalty. I would probably, that's kind of complicated to discuss, but you can pretty much get rid of most penalties from filing separately for taxes. So you filed separately for taxes. So now she's only got to show her $40,000 or $50,000 type income, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she probably has a retirement plan at work, right? So with her retirement plan, she can maximize that because let's say that you're making enough money to support the family, right? And so she puts a lot of her salary into her retirement.
Yep.
And so what that does is it lowers her taxable income from, let's say, 50,000 to about 30,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you also get a deduction of about $20,000 before they take any percentage at all. Okay. So you started at 50, now you're down to 30 for retirement. Now you're down to 10 that they take the 10% of for the payment based on your income. So 10% of $10,000 is $1,000 a year, maybe about $80 a month. Okay.
That's awesome.
So $80 a month, you think about over 10 years, you'd pay about $10,000 on a $30,000 loan balance. About $20,000 of that plus the interest that would have accrued would be forgiven tax-free.
Interesting.
Right.
That's incredible.
So that's a way to get a car worth of forgiveness. And that's a case with what I would call a fairly small balance.
Sure.
I know that sounds like a crazy thing to say, but our average borrower actually owes about $260,000.
Ooh. Wow.
Because, it's kind of like when a teacher hears what is our kind of, how do you make your money, right? Like, so we charge a few $100s for consulting fees, basically, for one-off plans. We customize it, figure out what to do. And so when you have $30,000, you're kind of like, well, if I might save like $1,200 of interest or something, like I'm not going to spend $500 to save, $1,200 because like maybe you don't save that, right? And then the forgiveness cases, again, it's just probably not this huge pressing thing because you probably just think, I'm just going to pay it off, even though you could save a bunch of money. That when people owe the equivalent of a mortgage on their brain, then that's when people get really freaked out. And when people
100%.
Wave the flag and they say, okay, I need some advice, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I wanted to get into the part of the show where where do people reach out to you to understand more about what you do? I'm sure you have a lot of online qualifications that you can go take a quick test and, see if you qualify, see if we, can be a fit for your company in order to help them, relieve themselves of some debt. Where do they go?
Yeah. I mean, if anybody's listening to this, they like podcasts. So I would say first check out the Student Loan Planner podcast. So we're on every place that you subscribe to this show. If you just type in Student Loan Planner, you'll find our podcast. So that's the way to get free help, right? The person struggling, can't afford anything. That's what I'd recommend for that person. And then for people who can't afford something, go to studentloanplanner.com/help. So that's the page that you'll read about our services. That's basically for people who are needing to know what to do. You don't know any idea, but don't have any idea what to do. And the people who do know what to do, they want to pay off their debt as fast as possible. the refinancing links are at studentloanplanner.com/refi. And then on the page, you'll see like a little contact button. So, if people want to get in touch, they just hit that contact button and just leave us a message.
Awesome, man. Well, look, we could be talking about this for hours. It's a huge issue in the United States today. A lot of people are being affected. We didn't even get to the side of the coin of why universities charge so much, which is, I think, a huge systemic issue as well, and something that we also need to address as a country, because the cost of a civil engineering degree or a medical degree in Australia or New Zealand or the United Kingdom is a lot less than, say, what you get charged here in the United States. And so that's directly a function of what the universities are charging. So something which is a whole other side of the coin, which we're not obviously going to address in this one hour podcast. But mate, at the end of every show, I like to dive into the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Let's do it.
Mate, what is the daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your show, towards your growth?
Towards my growth, I would say try to learn something new every day, reading the news, trying to learn something about something that I don't know anything about.
Awesome. What are you reading right now?
I like reading Wall Street Journal and I'm reading this book called Call Stories right now, just like people that were inspired to pursue specific paths in ministry in particular. So I think this is interesting. I'm not considering becoming a pastor, but I just really enjoying seeing what other people what led other people down this path of devoting yourself to spiritual kind of occupations versus like going out for just money.
Sure.
So it's kind of interesting.
That is interesting. It's a very trip. I always have the same issue, or not issue, but the same thought process as well. So maybe people are consumed by money that they got to go earn a lot of it, and other people are consumed by just giving back in the greater good of humanity. So it's very inspirational. Who is the great or most influential person in your career? And maybe you've already mentioned him earlier.
Yeah, I think besides my grandfather, I would probably say, oh boy, I mean, probably my professor of economics when I I TA'd and did a research assistant job for him, and just the amount of things that he taught me were just very consequential to me pursuing a path of learning about economics, which led to everything since.
That's awesome. That's awesome. In your business, what is the most influential tool that you use? And when I say tool, it could be a phone or it could be a software that you use online. What do you use on a daily practice?
Google Analytics. So It's kind of like any business, you have to know your numbers, right? And you have to know what's driving your success. Otherwise, you will not have any clue what to invest your next dollar in. Mm-hmm. So when we have something like Google Analytics to track what people are clicking and where and what pages are successful and which ones are not, I know what things more people are interested in. I know what things that are successful and which things are not. And it influences a lot of our capital allocation decisions.
Interesting. No, I think that's really good to again, know your numbers for your business in order to understand where to invest next, so you can steer the ship towards a successful horizon. So really, really, really good stuff. In one sentence, what has been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
So when I was feeling not super enthused about being in the corporate world, I got a bad performance review. I was, just not, let's just put it, I wasn't working as hard as I should have worked, and I wasn't putting the face forward that I should have. Mm-hmm. So for example, I fell asleep in a meeting one time, it was super boring and I literally fell asleep, that wasn't looked at well. And rightfully so. I mean, that gives a bad look. So I would say that was my biggest career failure, is just, just not being a top performer.
What'd you learn from it, but?
Perception perspective. Well, the thing that was interesting is at the same time, I was knocking it out of the park in terms of like tools and things I was coming up with. So I was super creative and really having, I think, a nice impact on the group that I was in, but I did not have a lot of the sort of visual cues and the perceptions that I was. Yeah. Right. And so much of corporate America is kind of like the perception, like who's got your butt in a chair for how long. Right. I mean, that's kind of a lot of what it's like. And then what's crazy is I work a lot less now, like a lot less, and make significantly more. And it's because it's all based off of results and not based off of projects or hours or something.
Or perception, as you just said.
Or perception. So if I fall asleep in a meeting now, the only person that yells at me is my wife when she gets home, because I work at home a lot, so I joke around, but it's like, but it's amazing. If you feel like you're confident enough to bet on yourself, I highly suggest it.
That's awesome. I think that's a massive takeaway. Betting on yourself is really, really important, and something that you've clearly gotten spades. Mate, one last question for you. Let's repeat what you said earlier. Where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to find out more about what you do. Just repeat those websites again.
Yeah, studentloanplanner.com. So just hit that site up. There's all kinds of stuff in the menu bar. Everything you need there. The contact button to get in touch. Everything's right there. And, I'm Travis Hornsby on LinkedIn and social and those kind of places if you want to reach out, like just personally.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I want to thank you for dropping by to teach us a little bit more about the student loan debt, quote unquote, crisis. Some of the takeaway pieces of gold nuggets that you've given us today. I think you have a real awesome ability to, coming from someone who, America, corporate world, to understand that you can be financially free and then be one of those Americans that, I'm saying all Americans are like, just can't get out of their own way, but a lot of Americans can't, and they then thus don't get afraid and then don't ever take any action to do anything. And I think you've done a very good job at realizing what is not stimulating you, taking action, figuring it out and going abroad, and then learning some life lessons and coming back and then really focusing on what your goal, which you said earlier, is to start helping others, right? You were just being in a bond trader, just doing nothing, trying to climb the corporate ladder. It was just a meaningless life. And so I think that's really, really awesome that you took control of it. You went traveling, you went and saw the world a little bit, and then you came back and now really impacting a lot of people. On the professional side, I think there's obviously a lot to unpack there. We spent like 30, 45 minutes talking about just the complexities of unpacking student loan debt here in the United States. If anyone is, interested in, reaching out to you, I highly recommend it because there's so many people probably listening to this show struggling or perceived to be struggling with student loan debt, where maybe there's an answer around the corner quicker than they realize if they talk to someone like yourself. Mate, did I leave anything out?
Yeah, I just think if you think your problem is your student loan debt, it's not. It's something else.
Right.
That's a big thing is I don't care how bad it is. I've seen people with $1 million in student loan debt. We've had multiple clients with $1 million of student loan debt. That's you don't have $1 million of student loan debt. Maybe one person listening to the show does, right?
Wow.
So that means that yours is not as bad as you think, and you just need to understand the math behind why it's not.
Awesome, man. Well, look, thank you again for dropping by. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Thank you, Reed.
Well, there you have it. Another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible advice from Travis. It really, really hits the nail in today's world where so many people are talking about student loan debt. Please head over to his website at studentloanplanner.com. He's also got a podcast about the whole thing. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to refinancing and restructuring your student loan debt and making sure you just understand the basic facts, because a lot of people are so confused that they don't know what the basic facts are. I want to thank you all for taking some time out of your day to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. And we're going to do it all again next week. So be bold, be brave, and remember, go give life a crack.